Welcome, everybody. Dr. Alan Goldhamer has been the director of the True North Health Center in Pen Grove, California for almost 25 years. The center specializes in medically supervised fasting. He was the principal researcher in 3 studies that have appeared in the scientific peer-reviewed literature on the use of fasting in the treatment of high blood pressure and diabetes. Dr. Goldhamer is the author of the Health Promoting Cookbook and recently, The Pleasure Trap. Thank you, Dr. Goldhamer, for coming.
Good morning. It looks like you guys have had a busy morning already. Always enjoy coming to San Francisco. It was about almost 25 years ago that I returned from Australia after going to osteopathic college, and I think my first public lecture was here, or at least at one of the Vegetarian Society's conferences. This morning, I want to talk to you about a topic that I am very interested in and I think is relevant to you, particularly as vegetarians. The fact is that we live in a society where people are getting fatter and sicker. In an epidemic proportion, as I'll demonstrate here shortly. And there's a reason for it. It's completely understandable. It'll make sense to you. And there's things that you can do that make a difference. And as good as being a vegetarian is from a health standpoint, it does not give you inoculation from the effects of this hidden force. I'm going to show you a couple pictures to prove a statistical phenomena that I found absolutely fascinating. This is a picture of my grandson, who is named Colin. Now I want you to think about something. Colin was born last year along with 250 million other babies on the planet. What are the odds that my grandson would be the cutest one of all? What are the odds? Yeah. There are a lot of misconceptions people have. There's a lot of misconceptions even vegetarians have. One misconception is that adults live a lot longer today than they did in 1900. You heard statements like that? Oh, we live a lot longer today.
I've got it.
But is it true? This information comes from the Center for Disease Control. This looks at how long do people live when they're 65 or when they're 85. In other words, an adult at 65 years old, how long can they expect to live? From 1900, an 85-year-old could expect to live 4 more years. Today, an 85-year-old can expect to live 5 more years. So an 85-year-old can expect to live about a year longer than they did in 1900. Now remember, that's before the advent of antibiotics and all the miracles of modern medicine. A 65-year-old in 1900 could expect to live about 12 years longer. Today, 15 to 16 years longer. If we look at it in a different way, years left to live at 65, it's 4 years increase from 1900 to today, and a 2-year increase at 85. Now, how could that possibly be true when we admit that life expectancy has gone up 28 years? Life expectancy has gone up 28 years since 1900. Life expectancy in 1900 was 47, today it's 75. So let's think about that. If life expectancy has gone up 28 years, but adults have only gone up 2 years or 4 years, where's that change happened? It's happened in infancy and in childhood. Infant mortality rates dropped from about 165 per thousand to 7 per thousand. That meant you had a whole lot more babies that didn't die at year 1 that lived to year 65. So you add 65 years to the average or life expectancy increases dramatically. But it's not because adults are living longer. It's because children are not dying in infancy or in childhood. And the reason they're not dying has very little to do, by the way, with modern medicine. It has to do with improved public sanitation issues more than anything else. improved hygiene, education, improved factors that have little to do with pills and potions and powders. Almost all the change is because of those alterations in infant mortality and childhood death, not because adults are living longer. A very important consideration as we carry on our discussion. What are people dying from today? What's the actual ultimate cause of death? Well, this chart demonstrates it. Tobacco use, diet activity issues, alcoholism, microorganisms, and toxins. If you look at it a different way from the World Health Organization, tobacco, high blood pressure, alcohol use, cholesterol, overweight, low fruit and vegetable intake, physical inactivity, illicit drugs, unsafe sex, and iron deficiency. These are the things that kill people. Now, what do most of these things have in common, with the exception of iron deficiency? Yeah, none of them have anything to do with deficiencies or lack of pills in your diet. These are conditions of dietary excess or lifestyle excess. And in fact, many of these conditions used to be called, as Dr. McDougall points out, the diseases of kings, because it was only the wealthy elite that could afford to indulge in the behaviors that lead to them. Yet these are the things that are killing people today. It used to be adults died from pneumonia and diarrheal disorders and infectious disease. Now we die from cardiovascular disease and cancer and autoimmune diseases. But we die at about the same point. In the world of our ancient ancestors, life was very different than it is today. It was very difficult to survive, to get enough to eat and avoid being eaten. In fact, for most of human history, population of humanoids was around 50,000 creatures. There were times where our species almost went extinct, in fact. But we did manage to survive. And we survived in large part because of human innovation. About 1 million years ago, human beings discovered how to use tools in a rather sophisticated way. About 500,000 years ago, we began to use fire. And humans have used fire for protection, for light, and for processing foodstuffs for about 500,000 years, longer than we're humans in our current form. About 100,000 years ago, we discovered the most powerful tool that the planet's ever seen. This tool was so powerful that it allowed us to basically take over the planet. And that tool is language. The sophisticated use of language allows us to accumulate information in a geometric fashion and pass it on. So something that you might take a whole lifetime to learn could be passed on to your offspring by just speaking to them. Whereas other creatures had to do trial and error, learn by doing each and every generation, we were able to accumulate knowledge. Now, these innovations were hugely important to our survival, but they did not result in a substantial increase in the population of humanoids on the planet. It wasn't until about 10 or 12,000 years ago that the discovery of agriculture changed everything. Humans were able to transform from creatures, nomadic creatures that hunted and gathered, to people that could settle down into one area. It dramatically increased the available potential caloric supply, food supply, and it allowed for the diversification of labor. Now, not everybody had to do the same things. Everybody didn't have to be the farmer. Everybody didn't have to be the hunter-gatherer. People that had specific skills, talents, or inclinations could direct their energies into those specific talents or inclinations, allowing the population of the human beings to dramatically increase. And it was about that time that our population began to dramatically increase. There were other innovations. The printing press, 600 years ago, allowed us to disseminate the products of language. And then you had all this dissemination of all this language, but we didn't know how to tell what was real and what wasn't real. Just because somebody wrote it down then didn't make it true any more than it does today. And so we invented we discovered basically a mathematically based system to differentiate fact from fantasy. And that system we call science. That's what science is. It's not perfect. It doesn't solve everything, but it's the most powerful tool we have to determine what's real. And then the final innovation we're going to discuss, again, major transformation, the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution just 200 years ago allowed, amongst other things, for us to processed foods. Now, not only do we have a lot of potential food around, but we were able to process it and distribute it. We changed the nature of food and many of its characteristics, leading to some of the problems that we'll be discussing today. This is a growth curve of human beings, starting 1 million years ago, through the development of tools, fire, language, agriculture. By the time of Christ, there were about 250 million people on the planet. Today, there are 6 billion, 6.5 billion and counting. Let's just say we've been highly successful as a species. In fact, if this curve were used for an insect, we would call it an infestation. We have taken over and transformed the planet behind the power of our innovation. And that innovation primarily is directed by this large bulbous neuronal net of tissue that's found at the end of the spinal column of human beings called the brain. The brain directs the behavior of the body. It directs the body through a chemical process, and although it's a complex chemical process, fundamentally, behaviors are driven to favor survival and reproduction. And the dominant chemical that drives behavior is this one called dopamine. That's kind of what it looks like. And dopamine is essentially the pleasure chemical. Dopamine is what's responsible behind sex feeling good and food tasting good. The more dopamine is secreted by the brain, the better something feels or the better something tastes. And those behaviors that were critical for survival for our species were eating and sex. Get enough to eat, live long enough to reproduce, pass the genes on. And so it's not coincidental that dopamine-related behaviors fundamentally regard and drive around food and sex. And this system of secreting dopamine every time we ate or every time we had sex reinforced those behaviors. Can you imagine a species that didn't like having sex? You think they'd go through all that huffing and puffing and everything just to, if there wasn't some reward? And feeding. I mean, you know, it's a problem gathering enough food and climbing up the tree and doing whatever it is you do to survive. You do it because you're driven to do it based on pleasure response driven by dopamine. It's actually, and it's a perfect system. It's allowed our species to survive. But we got very clever. And we figured out that there are ways of artificially stimulating this pleasure response, this chemical in our brain called dopamine. And we really got into it because that's how we're designed. One way to artificially stimulate dopamine is through the consumption of drugs, like alcohol. People like alcohol because of the way that makes them feel. It makes them feel good because it stimulates dopamine in the brain. When I first was in practice, 25 years ago, I had a woman who was an alcoholic. She's a blackout drunk alcoholic. She would not admit that alcohol was a problem in her life. Couldn't get her to see that. It was Mark Twain that said, "Denial is not just a river in Egypt." And this woman was absolutely in denial about the alcohol. In fact, she lost her job. But it wasn't because she was drunk and irresponsible. It was because her boss was no good. And she lost her husband. Not because of her drinking, but because her husband was no good. And she lost access to her children because the judge was no good. And she lost everything. And she still would not admit that alcohol was the driving force behind her problem. Until she had an epiphany experience. And that for her was she woke up right there, completely naked. And she had no idea how she got there. And she said she looked down at her naked body and she said, "Oh my, I have a drinking problem." It's the last time she's had a drink. And interestingly enough, her life's gotten better since then. People take all kinds of drugs to artificially stimulate dopamine in their brain. They shoot things into their veins. Who knows what this is? Yeah. Crack cocaine. They smoke crack cocaine. And cocaine is a fascinating drug because it's really efficient at stimulating dopamine in your brain. In fact, if you canalize the brain of a rat, not that we would recommend doing that, but it has been done, and you allow the rat, by pushing a little light, to get cocaine, the rat would continue to push the light until it's dead. It won't stop to have sex. It won't stop to eat or drink. It will continue to stimulate cocaine until it's dead. If you look at what cocaine does in the brain of human beings, and you compare it to, say, having an orgasm during sex, you get 10 times the dopamine secretion from smoking cocaine than having an orgasm during sex. Do you think it's any surprise that this is potentially reinforcing addictive drug? No. People like the way it makes them feel. It's called the pleasure trap. Drugs are a classic example of the pleasure trap. The pleasure trap involves the artificial stimulation of dopamine in the brain that leads to an addictive response. Now, we kind of all know that drugs can lead to addiction. Nobody, I don't think, in this room would deny that drugs can be a problem, or that alcohol can be a problem, or nicotine or caffeine. Although it's interesting, we give a highly addictive nervous system drug in the form of caffeine to our children, the chocolate and the cocoa and the soda pop, and then we wonder, after teaching them carefully to be drug addicts all their lives, that the way you deal with problems is to take drugs. If you have a headache, you take a pill. If you have a cough, you take a pill. If you're stressed out, you take a drug when you come home. And then when they're 16 years old, we send them off to a party and say, now remember, just say no. And we're shocked when they engage in the behavior that we've been consistently training them to engage in all their lives. This also happens to be the title of the book that Dr. Lyle and I wrote. And we say that the pleasure trap is the hidden force that undermines health and happiness, and it's true. The pleasure trap is the reason why people are fat and people are sick. Now, the question is, are people getting fatter? Do you think this is the first example of an ergonomic design? Do you think that's how they intended it? Or were people's posteriors perhaps somewhat smaller at the time that this coffee shop bar was designed? Today, tobacco use is devastating in its consequences, tobacco obviously being an example of the pleasure trap. But obesity now is close to tobacco in terms of its costs to society and numbers of deaths. It's catching up. During the past 20 years, there's been a dramatic increase in obesity in the United States. Today, 2/3 of adults are overweight or obese. 2/3. That means if you're not fat, you're abnormal. Almost aberrant. And there's a host of diseases intimately associated with obesity, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, breast and colon cancer, gallbladder, and, of course, high blood pressure. What's shocking to me is the impact if you look at children. While 4% were overweight in 1982, 16% were overweight by 1994, and by 2001, a quarter of all Caucasian and a third of African American and Hispanic children were overweight, and these numbers have continued to increase. Whereas 4% of childhood diabetes was type 2 in 1990, you can see it's risen to over 20% today, and of type 2 diabetics that are diagnosed, 85% of these children are obese. Which child is the vegetarian? What do you think? I want you to look at the change in, now this is not overweight, this is obese, that is people that have a BMI greater than 30. The change in the percentage of the people in the states in the United States in just the last few years. This was 1985, 10% light blue, 10 to 14% dark blue. This was 1985. By 1990, there had been a spread called the waistband of the United States here. By 1995, it was almost universal. By 1997, we had to come up with a new color because now 20% or more of the population was obese, right here in the home of deep-fried ice cream. By 1999, just a few years later, and then by 2001, yes, we're number one. Louisiana had to come up with yet another color because now greater than 25% of the entire population of the state was obese. By 2002, we got some company. 2003, 2004, it is by any stretch an epidemic. How is it possible that an entire population could become so fat, so fast? It is the pleasure trap. Because it turns out it's not just drugs that can artificially stimulate the dopamine in your brain. There are certain foods that act on exactly the same neurochemical mechanisms that drugs do. And they lead to the dietary pleasure trap, which is why people are fat. Now, interestingly enough, it's not just people. These same foods have exactly the same effect on animals. If you take rats in a cage, for example, and you provide 2 pleasure trap foods to those rats, in addition to their rat chow, ad libitum, you give them as much as they want to eat of their normal rat chow, which they'll maintain a stable weight on. But you add these 2 foods to the cage, those rats will increase their weight by 49% in just 60 days. Those foods are bread and chocolate. Okay? If you take pigeons, give them as much as they want to eat of their natural foods, concentrated seeds and grains, they'll get to a certain weight. But if you allow them to have access to bread, they'll get so fat they can't fly. Now, I know you're saying, well, wait a second, no, we're not rats, and we're not pigeons. Okay? But if you think we're that different than the other animals we share this planet with, I ask you to go to any buffet and watch the feeding behavior of the humans. Today, 93% of all the calories consumed in this country come from animal food or processed foods. That is meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, flour, sugar, products. That's it. 93% of all the calories. Oil, flour, sugar, meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products. Now, it's important when we talk about giving up highly processed foods that we describe this very quickly. So you don't describe it slowly. You say, what do you have to give up? You give up meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, and sugar. Now, why do you say it so quickly? It doesn't seem like you're giving up as much. And then when you describe the good foods, you describe them very slowly. Fruits, vegetables, and you should name all of them. Apples, banana, we just go down the whole list. Whole grains, beans, raw nuts, and seeds. So we recognize that today, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans, raw nuts, and seeds make up less than 7% of all of the calories consumed in this country. Did you know of that 7%, a third of that is potatoes, but it's potatoes found in French fries and potato chips? People are not eating, and listen, I'm not eating any of this stuff, which means somebody else has been eating my share to boot. People are not eating any fruits and vegetables as a statistically significant component of the diet. Fruits and vegetables are the decoration on the plate, as you would predict if you understand the pleasure trap. It's exactly what happens in every animal given exposure to the drug-like effect, whether it's drugs or highly processed foods. And humans are no different, except that at least in principle, human beings are gifted with this volitional consciousness that could, at least in theory, allow you to override this instinctive drive to engage in dopamine-seeking behavior and make a rational decision to do the right thing. But it is amongst the most difficult thing human beings will ever do. Now, the way that it works, and the way that it's best described working as it relates to food, the dietary pleasure trap, relates to food's caloric density. That is, the calories per pound. The higher the caloric density, remember back to our world of ancient ancestors, what was critical was being able to differentiate valuable foods and less valuable foods, because your job was to get enough to eat and not get eaten. And it was really tough. And the only animals that did that were able to be very efficient at deciding what to spend their energy eating. So if they could figure out what were the highest caloric density foods and eat those, they would survive selectively compared to animals that didn't. Your brain is an exquisite energy-conserving calorie detection device. That's essentially what a big hunk of it is being able to detect caloric density of foods so that you can determine which foods are most valuable to you to survive. Now, some foods, like salad, has 100 calories a pound. It's got calories, but not much. So your brain knows it's food, but it's not real excited about it. So when you see salad, you know, okay, I could eat that. And if there's absolutely nothing else to eat, you might even agree, fine, I'll eat a salad. while I'm waiting. Now, fruit, on the other hand, has 300 calories a pound. It has 3 times the caloric density of raw vegetables. What tastes better to most people, fruit or salad? Fruit. Now, why does fruit taste better than salad? Because it results in the stimulation of more dopamine. Because your brain is recognizing it as more valuable, and so it's rewarding you for being good and getting the more dense food. And if you look at fruit, your experience of that is different than looking at salad, isn't it? If you look at fruit, you go, yeah, I could eat that. And, you know, if you're used to eating fruit and you see something like this, you might think that'd be kind of cool. Get trapped in one of those and have to eat your way out. You know, it's food. But if you're really hungry, are you going to pick fruit, or are you going to pick things like potatoes, rice, or beans with their 500 calorie per pound density? Do you think if you're hungry, your brain knows the difference between if you're eating potatoes or if you're eating lettuce? Oh, yeah. Because you're going to survive better getting potatoes, rice, and beans in your diet because of the increased caloric density. But let's say you're not talking about just immediate survival now. What if we just want to have the pleasure of eating? How about something like, oh, I don't know, ice cream? If I blindfold 1,000 people from around the world and we shove a spoonful of chocolate Haagen-Dazs ice cream in their mouth versus a mouthful of salad, do you think they could tell the difference? Do you think 999 out of 1,000 would prefer the impact of the chocolate ice cream compared to the salad? Huh? Why? 1,200 calories a pound, 12 times the density, a lot more stimulation of dopamine, which means a lot more pleasure response. Of course it's going to taste better. And in fact, your brain is such a sophisticated... In fact, just look at it. It's different than looking at salad, isn't it? It's just a picture. Your brain is such a sophisticated calorie detection device that if I blindfold you and I give you a mouth of the deluxe premium Haagen-Dazs versus the Diet Delight stuff that's trying to fool you, do you think you could tell the difference? Oh yeah, you can tell the difference. They can't fool you because your brain is exquisitely sensitive. But did you know that bread has a higher caloric density, calories per pound, than ice cream? Have you ever seen this stuff? Hot on the outside, crunchy, soft on the inside. Have you ever been in a restaurant and they put out a basket of the stuff, you know, steaming hot? You might have a piece or 2 or 3 before you order your meal. In fact, you might eat the whole basket. Anybody ever done that? And you open the napkin up so to make sure the waiter can see it is empty. And then when he comes around and says, oh, would you like some more bread? And you say casually, well, sure, why not? As if you weren't waiting, like, where is that waiter? The basket's empty. God help his tip if he doesn't get there. Now, do you ever go into that same restaurant and say, excuse me, waiter, I'd like 3 large baked potatoes before I order my dinner, please? Do you do that? Do you eat 3 large baked potatoes before you order your dinner? Why don't you order and eat 3 large baked potatoes before you order your dinner? Oh, you'd be too full, would you? How many calories are there in 3 hunks of French bread? How about exactly the same amount as 3 large baked potatoes? How come you can eat the bread, stuff yourself full of bread, and still eat dinner, but you can't eat the 3 potatoes and get anything down? Because if you fill a human stomach with potato, it'll hold about 500 calories. That's it. If we just... But if I put bread in there at the same volume, that's about 1,600 calories. Now, what do you think you're going to overeat on? What do you think is going to make you feel more full per calorie? If you fill your stomach up with potato 3 times a day, you're only going to get about 1,500 calories. You're still going to be losing weight. Now, if you drown it with 4,000 calorie pound butter, we've got a different discussion to have. But the point is, the potato itself, like rice, like beans, has about 500 calories a pound. You're not going to get fat on it. That's why if you go to China, as I did recently, and went down the Yangtze River and stopped in 100 different little towns, and what was I doing? I was going to go find me some fat people. I wanted to find some fat Chinese people to find out how it was possible that they could be fat on rice, vegetables, and maybe a small amount of dead, decaying flesh once in a while. And so I went on my search, and I spent a whole 2 days looking for fat people. How many did I find? Well, actually, I found 2. They spoke English. I met them in an internet cafe. They were Chicago tourists. No fat people. They eat, on average, more calories than we do. 2,600 calories a day, but they're very active, they walk a lot, and they're eating rice, vegetables, little bits of fish, and some oil. The point is, if those same individuals come to the United States, or if we send our diet there, as we've done in some areas, like in Malaysia, and they adopt our diets, guess what happens? They get just as fat and sick as we do. Same conditions. It's not genetic. It's diet. It's not psychological, it's biological. Okay, what about sugar? Are you aware that they can now refine sugar down into like these little cubes? You seen those? That's like 100% pure sucrose. Have you ever been in the restaurant? I think it's really cool. They give you this bucket of sugar free. No cost. You can just have as much as you want. Now, do you ever go in there and say, take 11 teaspoons of sugar and just woof it down? Do you do that? It's free. You don't do that? Why not? Have you ever had one of these? Anybody? Ever had one of those? How many teaspoons of sugar in one of those? 11 teaspoons of sugar. Now, it used to be 11. Now, the new Coke, they figured out a way to get a little bit more sugar in, one more teaspoon, because it used to come out of solution. And it looked kind of crappy, you know. But they figured out a way to manipulate the phosphoric acid or whatever. Now they can get 12 teaspoons of sugar in. So why couldn't you drink one of those but not just, I mean, who are you kidding? You add a little caramel colorants and water and now it's okay? It used to be a 12-ounce Coke was a special treat that a child might be given on a special occasion. Now it's a 55-ounce big gulp with free refills. They're so big you can't put them in the cup holder. People hurt their back carrying them out to the car. And we wonder why our children are getting fatter. Well, 25% of the calories in some studies that teenagers consume in this country come from the sugar and soda pop alone. The sugar and soda pop alone, as much as a quarter of the calories consumed by teenagers. Don't know why they're getting fat. It's a mystery. What about this? Do people like chocolate? Chocolate has 2,500 calories a pound. Now, what tastes better? Chocolate or salad? Chocolate salad, is that what she said? You want people to eat chocolate? Salad, we need to come up with chocolate dressing. Right. Just look at chocolate. Now, does your brain react differently than when you looked at the lettuce?
I'm feeling the dopamine already.
Yeah, you can almost taste it. In fact, you know what's fascinating? There was a study done of women, and these women were asked, which would you rather do, have sex or eat chocolate? And do you know what the most common response was? It was, what kind of chocolate and how many pieces are we talking about? Now, potatoes taste good. Potatoes have 500 calories a pound. They taste good. But hey, potato chips, they taste great. And when they say, bet you can't just eat one, they're not kidding. Because potato chips have 2,500 calories a pound compared to potatoes at 500 calories a pound. Now, notice how we use subliminal influence to do this education. Potatoes, good, green. Potato chips, red, bad. I think we should stop kidding ourselves. Just stick your head in the deep fryer and suck. Healthy foods, interestingly enough in green, have 1 to 500 calories a pound. Artificial foods, foods responsible for the dietary pleasure trap, foods we invented that don't exist in a natural setting, 12 to 4,000 calories a pound. What's 4,000 calories a pound? Pure oil. That's why we like anything fried. Deep fried ice cream. It's a favorite in Louisiana. Interestingly enough, the fattest state in the Union. We're number one. Yeah. 93% of calories. This is a phenomenon. Foods that don't even exist in a natural setting or don't play a dominant role in the diet become 93% of all the calories consumed. Walk into any Costco or Safeway and just watch what people buy. There's a probably 0.8 correlation coefficient between what you see in the cart and how big they are. So why do we eat? Why do we bother? I mean, it's an awful lot of trouble. Okay? Why don't we just fast all the time? True. We don't do it because we would what? Yeah, we would die. It's very inconvenient. We have to eat. We need a source of calories. We need a source of fuel. We also need to get water. We need to get protein for its essential amino acids, fat for its essential fatty acids. We need vitamins. We need minerals. We need fiber. And we need phytochemicals. So whatever diet we put together, it better have all those things and in appropriate quantities. Now the problem is, the way that we put the diet together now, where 93% of food comes from these foods, animal foods, meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products. Meat, fish, fowl, eggs, it's really one word when you think about it. Animal foods, meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, and highly processed foods, oil, flour, sugar, and dairy again. Now, dairy is a very special food. It is the only food that gets to be in both categories. It's both an animal food and a highly processed food. Now, from a physiological standpoint, dairy products are probably the single most health-compromising foods that people consume. Unfortunately, some vegetarians believe because they don't have to actually kill the animal in order to consume it, it's somehow better than eating the flesh of the animal that was killed. The truth is, from a health standpoint, you'd probably be better off eating the flesh. Dairy products are amongst the most destructive foods that we feed, and it's particularly true with children. They're the leading cause of anemia in children. They cause insulin-dependent diabetes in children. Dairy products are responsible for much of the otitis media, much of the acne, and many of the other problems that you see that dominate. They're a primary source of saturated fat, both in vegetarians and meat eaters, and they should be excluded from the diet. But we live in a country where the dairy industry is so powerful that they get federal laws passed mandating that every child in the country, including the 90% of blacks and 80% of Asians that can't even digest milk because of inability to contain the necessary enzymes to break down lactose, must be given milk. You can't substitute it with some superior alternative like soy milk or something, because it's important that every single child be given this noxious substance. And if your school district refuses to do that, of course, they're going to lose their federal funding. Because we vote people into power that, although they're supposed to be representing our interests, oftentimes represents the interests of the people that have economic power. I know many of you are going to find that shocking, but I believe it to be true. There are problems with animal products, and I don't think that can be denied. Bacteria. I mean, you know, if they don't cook that hamburger quite enough, your kid might die. Viruses, including bovine leukemia viruses, prions, so that's exciting. An organism you can't even, a prion you can't even kill with cooking, that can fester in an individual for 10 years or longer, and when it manifests can melt your brain down so you get like Alzheimer's and fast forward. Really something wonderful to look forward to, but of course they promised us, don't worry, you can't cross the human blood-brain barrier, you have nothing to worry about, until a bunch of young people died in England, and a guy named Howard Lyman turned out to be telling the truth. Heavy metal contamination, growth stimulants and hormones, because it's not enough to just raise the animal and kill it. We got to make it get bigger, fatter, faster. Antibiotics, most of which, interestingly enough, are fed to animals. And this fundamental problem of biological concentration. Obviously, when animals get exposed to all these chemicals and they eat food that are contaminated, they biologically accumulate poisons in their tissues. You kill it, you eat it, and it builds up in you. You moving to the top of the food chain, if you're not a vegetarian, suffer the consequences of the biological concentration of all these problems with animal foods. So, what should we eat? Since we just eliminated 93+% of all the calories that are consumed in this country, what's left? Well, fruits and vegetables, raw nuts and seeds, and complex carbohydrates like potatoes, yams, squash, millet, rice, beans, etc. And if you make a diet that is exclusively derived from these foods, you get all the vitamins, minerals, fiber, protein, essential fatty acids, water, and minerals that you need, with the exception potentially of vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 being an exception because in a natural setting you'd never have to think about it. You'd get so much bacterial contamination, which is the only source of B12, including the B12 found in animal products, that you wouldn't have an issue. But now, today, rightfully so, we're very fastidious. We wash, we clean, we peel, because we don't want to get parasites and other problems. And so we may not get very much bacterial exposure from the environment. Therefore, over enough years, you can certainly become deficient in B12 if you're a vegan. Which is why we recommend you spend $10 a year, get a vegan supplement, make sure that you have a reliable source of B12 in your diet. And particularly if you're lactating or you're pregnant, you want to make sure there's B12 around, because even if you're okay, it doesn't guarantee that your milk will have adequate B12. So that's why we recommend supplementation for vegans with vitamin B12. How does it look if you put a diet like this together? Well, first of all, let's say we did something simple and easy in the morning, like oatmeal and fresh fruit. Oatmeal takes how many minutes to cook? 5. Yeah, 3 to 5 minutes. How many people just don't have time to do 3 to 5 minutes of food preparation? Okay? Many say, I don't have time to, Okay? If you don't, maybe you got to make a change in your life. But oatmeal, and I'm not talking about a little bowl of oatmeal, I'm talking about a bucket of oatmeal. Right? Big bunch of oatmeal, fresh fruit, maybe some flax seeds to keep your omega-3s up high. Big bucket of salad. Steamed vegetables at lunch and dinner with complex carbohydrates, preferably without oil and salt added, which you can get from the Health Promoting Cookbook, another book that I'm involved with. Now, how do you know that you're eating enough salad? And how do you know if the platter of steamed vegetables is big enough? There's a simple way to tell. You put it down. Anybody else walking in the room immediately goes, "Oh my God! You're not going to eat all that, are you?" If they don't react with shock and awe, it's not big enough. Go get yourself a big... Figure, what would you put down a platter of steamed vegetables for a family of 8? That's what you should be eating. And by the time you've eaten at least a pound of salad a day and a pound or 2 of steamed vegetables, if there's any room left, you eat as much as you want. You're not going to overeat. You're going to be lean and mean, get to things, and you're going to do fine. But the trick to this approach is to really eat a large volume of low-density foods. High nutrition, low-density foods. That's salads and steamed vegetables, potatoes, rice, and beans. And then if you're going to eat anything else, more concentrated foods, small quantities within your biological capacities. Health Promoting Cookbook is one of the few cookbooks that doesn't use any oil, any added salt, and no meat, fish, fowl, eggs, or dairy products. So it's a vegan cookbook with recipes that are so simple to make that even I can make them. And believe me, that means something. Okay, these are simple but good-tasting, health-promoting recipes. If you want this cookbook, come to our area and we'll get it to you at a discount today. Pleasure Trap. If what I've said today makes interest or a sense to you, this book can bend your mind. It's not going to tell you what you want to hear. But it is a very useful book at explaining why it's going to be so difficult to implement these changes, but strategies you can take that actually work. Now, sometimes, despite people's best interest, it's very difficult for them to break this addiction to highly processed foods. And just like it's very difficult for some alcoholics to break their addiction to alcohol. In fact, did you know that if you take alcoholics and you put them through the most expensive, most successful treatment program in this country, 30 days inpatient, and then they go to 90 visits in 90 days to an outpatient program, and then they get family support, what percentage of those alcoholics will fail? 70% will fail. That's the most successful treatment programs. That means 30% can succeed. And all you're asking an alcoholic to do every day is to choose not to drink. What are we asking people to do? Every day, 3 times a day. Change their diet. Oh, in a world designed to give you what you need, not what you want. And everywhere you go, the energy vampires are going to come out of the woodwork if you try these changes. Energy vampires do what they do best. They make other people as fat and sick and miserable as they are, so by comparison, they don't have to feel so bad. That's right. A little bit won't hurt. I made it just for you. It's not good to be a fanatic. Do we tell alcoholics, just drink in moderation? Everything in moderation. Just drink beer and wine, you'll be fine. Don't drink after 6 p.m. Put your alcohol in a smaller glass and put it down between each slurp. Chew your alcohol 50 times. Do we tell alcoholics to drink moderately? Why not? Because it doesn't work. It fails. Obesity, treated medically, has a failure rate higher than treating cancer. That means if you're fat and you want to get thin and you do it following conventional allopathic approach, your chance of success is less than curing cancer. And believe me, they're not doing very well with cancer. And the reason is because they're telling people the equivalent of telling alcoholics to drink from a smaller glass and put their glass down in between each drink. Okay? It doesn't work. If you're obese, if you're fat and you don't want to be fat, there's only one way to not get fat, and that's not to eat the foods that fool your brain's tiding mechanisms, and those are oil, flour, sugar, and dairy. Now, interestingly enough, I didn't mention meat there, because meat is a whole natural food. Your brain recognizes 100 calories and meat is 100 calories. That's why the dead Dr. Atkins diet can work. If you eat nothing but meat and vegetables, you can lose weight. You'll get heart disease and cancer and die a slow and painful death, but that's a different issue. Okay? The fact is, you have to eliminate the foods that can fool the brain satiety mechanisms. If you do that, you will not be fat. That's why you can have a billion people in China that are not fat, even though they're consuming on average slightly more calories than we consume here. You cannot solve this problem unless you get rid of the cause, any more than you can solve alcoholism without getting the cause. Now, the problem with that is the alcoholic doesn't want to quit drinking. They'll believe almost anything as long as they can keep drinking. And the fat person doesn't want to give up their addiction to the artificial stimulation of their brain from oil, flour, and sugar products. That's the truth. Now, sometimes it's so difficult with an alcoholic, we lock them up and help them make a change. And sometimes with people that are sick, that want to get healthy, we lock them up and do the same thing. We call it True North Health Center. And we use therapeutic water-only fasting because in a water-only fast, people neuroadapt. And although it takes a month to neuroadapt to a low-sodium diet and 3 months to neuroadapt to a low-fat diet, that means if you make a change from a high-fat to a low-fat diet, it'll take you 3 months before your brain starts to recognize the change and become satiated with the low-density foods. It'll constantly say, I'm still hungry. I just ate a bunch, but and it's not hunger for anything. It's a very special hunger. I need peanut brittle. It's an ice cream hunger. Nobody wakes up at night and says, dear, I got to go down to the 7-Eleven to get me some raw carrots. We're out of carrots. They don't say that. Do you know patients have told me that ice cream has been given language skills? They've taught the ice cream. That's right. My patients tell me they can hear it calling their name. Eat me! They have to eat it just to shut it up. Therapeutic water-only fasting, an ancient technique that we've used to great success, is a very efficient way of breaking that cycle. Cigarette smokers, for example, often report no withdrawal cravings or limited withdrawal cravings. People coming off alcohol and drugs, the same kind of thing, and it's no different with food. When people are done fasting, good food tastes good. And that's one of the ways we use fasting is to neuroadapt people back to a healthy eating program. It works very well. Not to mention we're in an inpatient setting, lots of education and all the rest of it. If any of you have any interest in any of this, number one, if you go to our website at healthpromoting.com, or it's also listed on this brochure. There's a brochure up here. You can download our studies. We've published 3 studies in the scientific literature. I might mention that one of our studies has the largest effects that have ever been shown in human beings in treating high blood pressure. As a consequence, our program is a fully covered medical benefit for the largest union in California now, the International Union of Operating Engineers. We have 440,000 people that are covered to do fasting for treating high blood pressure, diabetes at our facility. And as a consequence, we've just actually got our public hearing date, November 9th, for a large new state-of-the-art facility that we're going to be building in Sebastopol, California, on 27 of the most beautiful acres in Sonoma County. 15 of which are wetlands, which are being donated to the Open Space District for permanent preservation. We're doing this environmental demonstration project. It's a solar facility. It'll be a net energy producer. We've got 5 acres of organic agriculture going in, as well as a compilation of our inpatient facility, our outpatient program, and a commercial production kitchen called True North Health Kitchen, which will be making and delivering healthy food to people, improving our long-term outcome data. If I don't know, do I have any time left? I'm going to take questions until they kick me off. Yes? Yes. Salt is one of the pleasure trap foods. In fact, salt is, you're designed to hold and store salt at any cost. In the world of our ancient ancestors, salt was a precious commodity. So you were designed to find it wherever it was and hold on to it. Because we didn't have any processed salt. That's a post-industrial revolution, relatively modern kind of a thing. And so what happens now is, when we learned how to, salt used to be used as money. It was a means of exchange. It was such a precious commodity. Well, now we've got it in an abundance. And so what happens is, instead of actually going to the trouble to get fresh foods ripe and processed properly, we just pick any old thing and throw salt on it, and every cup of salt tastes great. And so what happens is your body's designed to hold salt, it holds fluid to protect it, so particularly genetically vulnerable sensitive people, blood volume goes up, blood pressure goes up. That's a major part of hypertension, the leading contributing cause of death and disability in industrialized countries. So salt is a food that we want to minimize or eliminate. In the health promoting cookbook, for example, we don't use any salt. At our facility, we don't use any salt, but you can use herbs in foods to make foods interesting, and you also get over the addiction after about 30 days. 30 days in a low-salt diet, you can't even eat a soup at a restaurant because it'll literally burn your tongue because you're used to it. Now, we try to pretend by using Bragg's aminos or other things that have some... we will use sea vegetables. We'll rinse those sea vegetables to minimize their sodium content. But, you know, a lot of these phony salts are just that, phony salts. Many of them actually have sodium chloride. They don't tell you that. And others use other things that have similar chemically induced agents. We would recommend avoiding all of them, because until you get rid of those things, you don't neuroadapt to a healthier diet. Yes, ma'am.
Is it the calories in the food, or is it the processing that denature the food?
It's not the calories only, because there are many natural foods that have high caloric densities, but they don't fool the brain. When you take wheat berries and boil them, they're 500 calories a pound, no problem. But when you grind them into a flour, which is a relatively modern approach, bake them at high temperature, you artificially dehydrate them and concentrate them, and now those same wheat berries have 1,500 calories a pound instead of 5. That's why if you ate an Essene bread that was truly sprouted, high moisture content, you're not going to have the same problem that you would eating a traditional bread product in terms of getting fat. Because you're fooling the brain. The brain says, well, that's 92 calories, when really it's 100 calories, and you'll slightly overeat. You're not overeating much. It's still relatively sensitive. But that little difference, cumulative over time, is why people are getting fat. That is it.
What about the opioids that are created because...
In dairy products. Yeah, Dr. Bernard makes a good point of that in his book, Breaking the Food Seduction, that there are other things besides dopamine, and certainly opioids may be one of the factors that are responsible for artificially stimulating. Now, it's also, there's not just dopamine, there's other neurochemicals involved. We've simplified it to make it, you know, otherwise it ends up becoming a biochemistry lesson. But dopamine is the dominant chemical. It's a real funny story, I'll tell you. When we were writing the book, we wrote to the guy that did some of the original research on dopamine, an academic guy at one of the universities, and we said, look, here's what we're presenting. Do we have it right? And he wrote back and he said, gee, how clever of you to write a popular book about my research. And he says, it's obviously not quite, you know, it's more complex than that, but yeah, essentially you got it right. So the idea being it is a very complex issue, human motivation, and there's psychological, there's other issues as well, but I think we've got the essence of it here. And the bottom line is if you don't eat oil, flour, sugar, and dairy, you will lose 2 pounds a week down to your optimum weight. That's how it works. Okay, first of all, what you do is you read The Pleasure Trap. Because once you've read The Pleasure Trap, you'll understand what it is you're fighting. And you'll read Dr. Lyle, our psychologist, the co-author of the books, strategies for dealing with what really are the toughest part, which are the psychological roadblocks to health. The physiological ones are a problem, but they're not the limiting factor. You know, the alcoholic that quits drinking is free of alcohol. They're no longer physiologically addicted, but they go back to drinking not because of the physiological issues, because of the psychological issues. And The Pleasure Trap is a useful book at actually giving you strategies that are helpful. Not necessarily the ones you'd ideally want to have to follow, but the ones that work. Okay? Then what I would do is implement a health-promoting diet using the resources on our website at healthpromoting.com and the Health Promoting Cookbook. And if you find it's too difficult, then what you need to do is take some time out and join us at the True North Health Center, where we can put you through a cleansing program, lock you up, brainwash you, and then release you to become a walking neon sign of healthful living, making us look good. Okay? Yes? Tofu is a highly processed food, 55% of calories from fat. I think it can be helpful to the degree that you use it when it's fresh, in moderation like you would any bean or concentrated product. But you need to be careful that you're not trying to replace meat by eating large quantities of concentrated food. So if you're using it like you would beans, it might have a useful role in the diet, particularly with kids and others where you're trying to get higher caloric density. Remember, with children, unlike adults, you're trying to get more nutritional density because you're not worried so much about, especially on this kind of diet, your kids are not going to be fat. Sometimes they get a little bit thin. And so if you want to get very nutrition-dense foods, that's where raw nuts and seeds and avocados and things like tofu can be very useful. But the mistake that most vegetarians make is they think they need to make up for the lack of dead, decaying flesh in their diet. You don't need to make up for the lack of meat in your diet. You just need to get rid of the meat. Okay? And then you need to get all of your calories from whole natural foods, not from highly processed, heated, beaten, treated, chopped, diced, salted, sugared crap that's being sold at 5 times the cost of whole natural foods, because that's what people want, is to artificially stimulate their brains. And now, oh, it's organic chocolate, now I can pretend that it's good for me. Oh, now it's organic this, I can pretend that it's not going to be a problem. No, no, no. Whole, natural foods. Fruits, salads, steamed vegetables, potatoes, rice, beans. That's the diet. Not pack. You know, they say, well, you got to learn to read labels. No, you don't. If it's got a label, you don't need it. Yes. Well, I think you're looking at television and visual imaging, have a very powerful impact, a very satisfying and stimulating impact on the neural mechanisms of the brain. The question is, what about computers and television and these things, and how does that relate to dopamine? And clearly, it's not exactly the same mechanism. Remember, there's other mechanisms, including serotonin and norepinephrine. There's all kinds of different effects that are going on in the brain. And the dependence that people get in terms of being overstimulated by these visual images can be devastating, can have significant consequences, not the least of which is keeping people stimulated too late so they don't get their normal sleep cycle. And since sleep is fundamentally responsible for healing, and that during non-REM deep sleep is when the anabolic cascades of hormones get stimulated for healing, not getting enough sleep is one of the leading reasons why people get sick. It's a great way to suppress your immune system, and it's also why people are fatigued, which leads them to have to believe that they need to be dependent on addictive substances like that black noxious agent that's commonly used by 90% of the population in the morning called coffee to stimulate them because they didn't get enough sleep because they stayed up watching the TV or looking at their computer screen too long. But it's not the same mechanism that you get from the food. Different mechanism.
Red wine with dinner, not okay?
Alcohol is a fantastic substance. Alcohol. What about red wine with dinner? It's red, so it's like from grapes. So there's still some traces of nutrition left. They haven't completely filtered out every last bit of phenol. Alcohol is fantastic. 7 calories a gram. It's like liquid fat. I mean, you might as well just pour it on your belly because that's where it's going to end up. Same thing with chocolate. Just melt it down, rub it on. Then when you're done, you can wash it off. You don't have to carry it around all week. Also, alcohol, like ice cream, they can put all kinds of stuff in there and not tell you because you don't need to know. Alcohol is a powerful anti-consciousness drug, which is, of course, why people like it, because it stimulates dopamine. So if you don't mind being fat and addicted, I guess it's probably okay. But no, I wouldn't recommend it. It's certainly not a health food. It's a health-compromising food. In fact, even small amounts of alcohol are one of the leading contributing factors to high blood pressure, for example. They don't tell you that. They're trying to tell you it's good for your heart. Why do they say it's good for your heart? Well, it slightly increases HDL, and in studies where you displace animal food with alcohol, as bad as alcohol is, animal food may be even worse. So the people that drink some alcohol and don't eat quite as much dead, decaying flesh may not have heart disease at quite the same rate as the people that didn't. That doesn't make it healthy. They say statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics, and they're lying through their teeth when they tell you that alcohol is a health food. Yes?
I want to ask you about B12, and I've heard a rumor that B12 can't be metabolized by supplements such as pills and so forth.
Not true. But the B12 in supplements, the question is, what about B12, and can you metabolize B12 found in supplemental nutrition? Sublingual B12 comes from the bacterial production of B12 concentrated isolate, and it absolutely is absorbed. I can prove that, and I do every day in practice because we can monitor methylmalonic acid levels, the gold standard of B12 status, and literally within a week you see changes with supplemental B12. It's a reliable source of increasing B12 in the diet. And the good thing about B12 is, particularly sublingual B12, your body only absorbs a certain amount, and it regulates that. You're not going to overdose on oral sublingual B12. And there's almost never a reason why you have to do injectable B12. Even in cases where you have depletion, we can re-alimate people orally, even in people that have had problems with intrinsic production, because there's about 2% of absorbed through osmotic absorption in the gut.
Why do we need B12?
Because B12 is an essential nutrient necessary for formation of our nerve cells. If you have a B12 deficiency, although it takes maybe decades to deplete B12. In fact, I did an experiment with a subject where we carefully avoided any supplements, any fortified foods, any animal foods, and we monitored methylmalonic acid for 19 years. It took 19 years, but eventually methylmalonic acid started to rise, indicating beginning of B12 depletion, and that subject was me. So it took me till I was 40 in order to be able to get depletion, but I was able to actually prove that if you go long enough, you can do it. And there's no question that one of the problems I see in vegans is that we get some vegans with B12 deficiency, and it can be devastating, and it's completely unnecessary. Supplemental B12 is a reliable way of maintaining. Now, if you don't want to take a supplement, that's fine, but you need to at least test once in a while methylmalonic acid and make sure your levels are okay. If you're maintaining it okay because of the bacteria in your mouth, about 1/10 of a picogram a day made by bacteria in your mouth, some people can maintain levels for a long period of time with that. I got no problems, but if your levels are low, it needs to be corrected. And that is a mistake, and that's, vegans don't have very many problems, so when they get problems, it really stands out, and that's one of the problems. In some of the studies, you'll notice vegetarians don't have much lower heart disease rate than meat eaters. And it's because B12 deficiency leads to increases in homocysteine, which is an irritant that results in cardiovascular disease. If you look at vegans that don't have B12 issues, they have a dramatically lower risk factor. But we're offsetting it in some vegetarians because of nutritional deficiency. Yes?
Can you get B12? Like, what if I just start feeding more animals?
If you're pulling stuff out of the ground and getting a lot of bacterial contamination, you'll get some B12, but you'll also start getting worms and parasites and other stuff, so we don't know that we'd recommend that. B12 is formed only by bacteria. Even the bacteria of the B12 you get in meat comes because of bacterial production. So it's a risk-reward ratio. In my opinion, you want to test for B12, and if it's low, you want to supplement it. And that's safer than trying to get it by pulling stuff out of the ground that you don't wash properly. Okay? Vitamin B12, I believe, is about, serum B12 is $30, and methylmalonic acid is probably $80, something like that. Vitamin B12 supplementation costs about $10 a year.
No, I'm sorry, but instead of testing for it.
Some people would prefer philosophically not to supplement unless it was indicated. In that case, we would test for it.
You sell it at True North?
I don't sell any supplements. If you want to buy supplements, you go to any reliable, go to your health food stores, get a reliable brand name of sublingual B12, I don't care which. Get a brand name just so you know that the thing is real and it'll break down. But we are not in the pill selling business. So. Well, what happens is the brain is very adept at allowing you to consume of whole natural foods, the amount that you need, and then it stops you. Like if you start eating apples off the tree, the very best apples, at a certain point, they don't taste good anymore, do they? Your brain is saying, you've had enough. And that works perfectly with whole. What happens if you eat too many apples? You get a bellyache. It says, and it punishes you, and you don't do that again. Does that happen with chocolate? You can eat unbelievable amounts of highly processed foods because they're not natural foods. Your brain's not set up to be able to differentiate them. And so that's why it's possible to get fat. You can't get fat eating apples, but you can get as fat as you want to be eating ice cream and chocolate and bread. Okay, so you have some built-in mechanisms designed to regulate you perfectly, just like the pigeons do when they eat their natural foods. That's why they don't get fat. You put the bread out, though, the same thing happens to the pigeon. Have you seen those pigeons? They can't fly anymore. Yeah. Yes?
I have a friend that wants to be an MD. You recommend MD education?
Well, I'm on the faculty at Bastyr University in Washington. I'm also teach at the school in Arizona and the National College of Naturopathic Medicine in Washington. So you're never going to get me publicly recommending one school over another one. You can ask me privately and I'll tell you what I think. I can tell you this, though. I've been teaching at Bastyr for 8 years, a course on clinical nutrition. So I know at least at Bastyr they have an outstanding course on how to do clinical fasting. Okay, it's great. Yes? Statistics don't lie, but the manufacturers of foods will tell you what you want to hear. Yeah, you can eat Cheetos. We got a different fat in it. It's fine. Don't worry. Be happy.
My question is now that the New York City Health Commissioner has announced that he wants all the restaurants, over 24,000 restaurants,
Yes.
to go trans fat free. I saw him publicly state, well, I'm not going to go after saturated fat because people aren't going to stop eating meat.
Right.
What's your comment on this?
Okay, here's my 2 comments. Number 1, you want to remember above all else, there's only one thing that's driving all of this. All they want is your money. That's all they want is your money. So you always remember that in the back of your head. And the second thing is, if it has a package, if it has a label, you probably don't want it.
I guess my question is more on the policy level. How do we get to the New York City Health Commissioner to say, don't go after trans fat, we're just going to replace it with another unhealthy fat in the oil that they're frying and french fries in. Go after the whole, what you're talking
I think you should get Michelle Simon's new book and go onto her website and subscribe to her blog and participate in all the things that they're recommending, because there's unfortunately, I'm a clinician. I spend all my time sequestered in a little place, locking people up, trying to get them to eat healthy. I don't know the best way politically to deal with this thing. I believe that we have a lot of neo-Nazi fascist pigs that have been elected into power whose only goal is to feed their own selfish interests. And so we need to vote different people in, perhaps ones that actually have people's interests at heart. Because I'm not sure you're going to get the people that are in power now to behave in a reasonable and rational way.
My wife's on my case for things like veganase, partially non-hydrogenated oils on bread. I mean, I look at it, health food store, okay, it's a substitute for mayonnaise. You know, it tastes good, it stimulates everything, I know.
So fortunately, you're not going to have to worry, because if you follow my recommendations, you're not going to be eating the bread to begin with, so you won't have to worry about what to put on it. Okay. If any of you have any other questions, I'm at a booth over here. We got books. Take them away so I don't have to carry them home. If you want to go into our website, we've got lots of information. You can call me. There's a brochure up here. You can call me. You can ask me questions out here. You can email me anytime. I answer every email every night. If you're interested in fasting, we've got an excellent clinic. Again, there's information there. Thank you so much for having me here.